Welcome to the very first recorded interview for Reaching Beyond My Reach. We're here today with author Jeff Goins, and I have to tell you that he's one of the most influential writers I've ever encountered. A few years ago, my friend Rachel told me I just had to read his ebook, You Are a Writer, and that piece is what I needed in order to move forward in my calling as a writer. It helped me drop the someday part from someday I'm going to be a writer and embrace the fact that I already am a writer and to start putting my words out there. He's also written a couple of other excellent books, Wrecked and The In-Between. But today we're going to be talking with Jeff about his latest book, which came out in March, The Art of Work. And we're going to be doing that. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to interview you today, Jeff. It's been an honor to serve on your book launch team for The Art of Work, and I've been so encouraged by the book, and I think it's a valuable piece of writing for anyone who's searching for how they fit into this world. And I also think it's important to understand that everyone has a calling because God has created each of us with a unique purpose that only we can fulfill. And I love the practical wisdom that you offer on recognizing your calling. So thanks again for being with us today, Jeff.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. Thanks for being part of the launch team, and thanks for saying all those nice things.
Yeah, absolutely. A few weeks ago, we had a phone call with the book launch team, Jeff, and you admitted that you have fears just like all of us. But you went on to say that you choose to embrace that fear and act anyway because you know that fear usually means that you're about to stumble into something significant. Can you tell us a little more about what that looks like as you pursue your calling as a writer and as an encourager to those who are just starting to pursue their calling?
Yeah, I would say I do that sometimes when I'm, uh, doing things right. Plenty of times when I feel afraid and I don't do that right. But yeah, I mean, what was interesting about writing The Art of Work is I tell all these stories of people who did these. They're everyday, ordinary people who did extraordinary things. They were doing something meaningful with their lives. And sometimes it didn't feel that big or meaningful to them until they recognized kind of the magnitude of what they were doing. Um, but what was interesting about all of these people that I interviewed was I asked them, was there ever a point at which you didn't feel afraid, where you just knew that this is what you're supposed to do and you went and did it? Because I think traditionally this is kind of the story that we tell about what it means to find your calling or discover your purpose. You have some sort of epiphany and then you go do it and everything's great after that. And that was not the case for them, and it certainly hasn't been the case for me in pursuing my life's work as a writer. They said no. I always felt afraid, and I felt the most afraid at the most significant transition points. So you were talking about your decision to start becoming a writer and realizing that you already are one, and yeah. So that was a turning point for me when I had this conversation with my friend Paul, and I said, my dream is to be a writer someday, and he said, Jeff, you don't have to want to be a writer. You are a writer. You just need to write. And that was scary for me. On the cusp of starting to call myself a writer and put myself out there, that was a scary thing. But as soon as I did that, there was this relief. There was, all this stuff started happening as a result of my simply calling myself a writer. And that was one of many, different decisions where I would approach this decision. Like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to do this. And then I would do it, and something great would happen. And so, what I mean by that, fear being an indicator that we're about to do something significant, is often the biggest things that we could do in life tend to be met with the greatest resistance. Sometimes that's internal resistance. It could be, just people wanting to hold you back, jealousy. It could be spiritual resistance. I mean, there's lots of different components to it. But I think anytime you attempt something great, there's going to be resistance. And so the natural response to that is to be afraid, to fear rejection or failure. And so I don't look as fear as an indicator of what I shouldn't be doing. I look at it at least as a clue of something that I might ought to be doing.
Awesome. What advice would you give to someone who's pretty certain about their calling, but are afraid of the good, the bad, and the ugly so much that they arrive almost to the point of deciding just to stay put rather than moving forward in their calling?
Yeah, well, if you know exactly what you're meant to be doing, I I am now really skeptical of people who say that, because having gone through that myself and talked to a lot of people, I don't think that it's necessarily, not true that you know what you're supposed to do. But I just find that the norm more often than not is people maybe have a vague idea, but they aren't exactly sure what to do. But let's say you're one of those rare people who knows exactly what you're meant to be doing with your life. Well, then I don't think you have an excuse to not act. I think going back to the fear thing,
Mm-hmm.
the the thing that you should ask yourself is not what if I fail, right? Because that's the
Right.
thing that everybody wants to go, oh, what if I fail? The
Mm-hmm.
thing that you should really ask yourself is, what happens if I don't do this?
Yeah.
What do I really lose? What do I miss out on? My friend Jody Nolan, who's in the book,
Mm-hmm.
she found her calling at 58 years old
Mm-hmm.
after lots and lots of resistance and struggle and feeling not good enough, feeling like a failure. And then finally, when she went for it, she said that the fears switched for her. The fear didn't go away. It's just, a bad fear of failure was replaced with a better fear, which was the fear of not doing it, not going after it. And she said, I was no longer afraid of failing. I was afraid of not trying.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing that we should really be fearing. If you know what you're meant to do, you should be afraid of not going for it. You can't necessarily control whether or not it's going to succeed, but on your deathbed,
Mm-hmm.
20, 50, 100 years from now, are you going to regret attempting something great and failing, or are you going to regret more never having tried
Yeah.
because you're afraid of what might happen?
Yeah. Switching the questions, I think that that's the key right there. Like, what are you afraid of more? And it's a good segue. I was going to read a quote from the book. It says, fear is a powerful deterrent, but it can also be an effective motivator. The fear of failure or rejection can be unhealthy or irrational, but fear of not telling your loved ones how much you care is important. So, not
Right.
all fear is bad. Some people, though, let fear run their lives. They avoid risk, hoping to minimize the chances of failure, and in effect, move in the opposite direction of a calling. The trick is to know when to listen to your fear and when not.
Mhm.
So that's a nice little tie up there, and I loved Jody's story in the book. It
Yeah.
was just so powerful about, just making sure that you write down or like get the message to the people that you love,
Yeah.
what you want to tell them and not let the words go unsaid.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I often struggle with is feeling unprepared in my tasks, and I appreciate how you say in the book, if we're truly called, the work always comes before we're ready. We will have to act in spite of feeling unprepared. Jeff, what would you say are some of the key ingredients to bolstering bravery to act even when you feel unprepared?
I think there's two parts to that. Because I think a lot of us are thinking that our dream or our calling is this thing that we're going to find someday, and I think it's actually, I think that it can be something new, but it's also something old. And what I mean by that is, if you're going to find out what you're supposed to do with your life, you need to do what Frederick Buechner calls listening to your life. Frederick Buechner was this author, theologian, teacher, and he says, listen to your life, because every moment in your life is a key moment. And then later on, another author, an activist named Parker Palmer, wrote in his book, Let Your Life Speak, which is a phenomenal book. He said, before I can tell my life what I want to do with it, I need to listen to my life telling me who I am. So why that's important, I think, is before you can, go decide what you're going to practice, or what you're going to do, even in spite of feeling not ready, you need to spend some time discerning, figuring out, what can I learn about myself from my life?
Mm-hmm.
So my friend Paul said, you don't have to want to be a writer, you are a writer, you just need to write.
Yeah.
There was a really important principle tied up in that very simple sentence, which was that activity follows identity.
Mm-hmm.
That before you can go do something, you have to become someone. And I think it's really important to embrace who you are before you decide what you're going to do. And the good news about that is it really narrows your options. You can't, this idea that you can kind of do anything that you want isn't completely true. I don't think you're stuck in the past, or, confined to what your parents wanted you to do, or, what runs in the family necessarily. But most of us feel like there's so many options, we don't know what to do. And I think there are clues hidden in your past about your future.
Mm-hmm.
So before you can even start the work, I think you need to listen to your life. Look for themes, trends, things that keep popping up, things that you like, things that you don't like, things that you're good at, things that you're not good at. And then you'll have some vague ideas of some things to try, at which point you're going to have to practice. You're going to have to engage in practice. And you won't be ready. You know,
Right.
this idea that the teacher appears when the student is ready, I don't think is actually true. I think that the teacher appears often when the student is least ready,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the student's job to become ready. How do you become ready? By working hard, by going after it. Think about every great story: Star Wars, Wizard of Oz, The Matrix. Anytime a hero is about to engage in something that's a great story, somebody comes along, some guide comes into their life and says, "Here's what you need to do. Here's the plan." Obi-Wan Kenobi comes to Luke and says, "You need to become a Jedi." Luke is not ready for that, but what he does is he recognizes the opportunity and he steps into it, and that process is full of all kinds of failure that ultimately gets him to his destiny.
Mm-hmm.
I think the same thing is true for our lives. We need to be listening to our life, but also, not just the past, but the present, being vigilant about opportunities available to us and people around us who can help us kind of meet the task because we can't do it on our own. And in the book, I call that an accidental apprenticeship. It's this idea that your life, the people in your life, many of which are informal relationships, are preparing you for the work that's to come. They're teaching you the things that you need to know. But the trick is to make an accidental apprenticeship still intentional. There are all these people in your life that you could be taking more advantage of in terms of learning from them and using those opportunities to grow. And most people, I think, miss out on those because they're waiting for their big break,
Mm-hmm.
not realizing that their big break right now is staring in their face.
Right. Yeah, and kind of connects to the in between too, like
Yeah.
how you wrote that too. And I'm
Yeah.
finding that to be so true in my own life. Like I'm writing a book proposal right now, and every time I hit a wall, I'm like, oh, I can't do this on my own. I have to get other
Yeah.
people involved, and I am, it does make you sit down and be intentional about who you want to be involved too, and then you look back over what you're writing and you realize people have been part of your story the whole time. So
Yep.
that's a good word.
Hmm.
To the person who has started pursuing their calling but finds themselves responding to things that have gone awry, what encouragement do you have for them about finishing well in their calling?
Well, if something has gone awry, then you're on the right track. Because one of the things that I saw in all the biographies that I read, all the interviews that I did, and certainly in my own life, is that the road to your calling, which I actually think lasts your whole life,
Mm-hmm.
is full of failure.
Mm-hmm.
And I mentioned this at the beginning of the book. Most people, I think, treat a calling like a plan. This is sort of particularly a Western and even an American mindset that if I can just plan it out, then I can do it. This is the American dream.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the way a calling works. I certainly don't think it's the way God works. It's a process of looking at your life, often going, man, all these things went wrong. What am I supposed to do with this life that feels like a missed opportunity or like I've been gypped in some way? And I think that a calling isn't something that you plan. It's what you have left often in life when the plan goes horribly wrong.
Mm-hmm.
In the beginning of the book, I tell a story of Garrett Rush Miller, who's this 5-year-old boy who gets a brain tumor and is given 5 years to live. Well, he goes on to run, over a dozen triathlons with his dad. He beats the cancer, and it can come back at any day now. But he goes on to live this very full life. Climbed Machu Picchu, became an Eagle Scout, and volunteers his time with a charity called Wounded Warriors. And he and his dad both realized that, and they taught me this really, throughout the course of writing this book, that what makes a life extraordinary aren't the special circumstances or chances that you get, but rather what you do with them.
Mm-hmm.
And so if things are going wrong in your life, I think the challenge is to have the right mindset, to have the mindset that Garrett had, which is to not wait or wish for something better to come, but instead to dig into wherever you are and try to make the most of it. How can you live an extraordinary life right now as a stay-at-home mom, as a plumber, as a park ranger? Now, that's not to say that there aren't scary, brave choices ahead of you,
Right.
but I think most people are longing for, the past that they could go back and relive, or the future that will never come. And I think your calling needs to be extracted from this life that feels a little too ordinary for our own liking sometimes. And, in terms of, what you can practically do about that, I mean, I think first you have to develop that mindset. And then, second, you need to look around for things that you can be doing right now, including people who can be helping you. And then I think the third thing you need to do is just try stuff, realizing that failure isn't an obstacle, it's an opportunity. I like thinking of failure as pivot points, as these walls that you run into, and then they tell you something about yourself. They tell you that you did it the wrong way, or it was the wrong time, or maybe it was the wrong opportunity itself. And so instead of going back to square one and starting over again, I think you just need to pivot. You just need to slightly alter your course and then keep moving ahead. Every story of success, of somebody discovering their life's work, was met with lots and lots of failure. Like a season of failure, 10 years of failure was sort of the norm, a decade of failure. So if you haven't failed for a decade straight yet, then you're ahead of the game. You're beating people like Albert Einstein and Steve Jobs and Mother Teresa and all these other people who it took a long time for them to figure out what they were supposed to do. And the trick was to not try once, fail, and then go, well, I tried. But to keep trying until you found a way. And I think that's what we all need to do.
Yeah, that's very insightful. And I think it touches a lot on what you say in the book, for example, that quote here, when difficulties come, and they always do, you will be inclined to give up and move on to something easier. But if your calling is more than a good idea and you're willing to put in the hard work and persevere, taking bold steps along the way, you can stand firm in the face of hardship. So I think like what you're saying is, just it's going to come. Just stand in the middle of the storm, and you'll be weathered through the season, but you'll be better for it, for accomplishing your task and calling. And as we wrap up here, I just thought it was so brilliant in The Art of Work when you said, if significance is what matters to you, you can structure your life and work in a way that allows you to live your legacy now. In fact, your giving doesn't have to be a byproduct of your success. It can be the very thing that drives it in the first place. And you go on to say that success isn't the goal, legacy is. Ultimately, we are called to call others. We are given gifts to be given away. I can't help but think about how biblical this is, especially in terms of discipleship. And you actually talk about going through apprenticeships. You mentioned the accidental apprenticeships earlier, in order to become a master at your calling too in the book, which is really what discipleship looks like, training others to abandon their lives to Christ while simultaneously training them to reproduce the next generation of Christ followers who have counted the cost and found it worthy. I'd just love for you to offer some final words about not only leaving a legacy, but living a legacy.
Yeah, I think most people think of legacy. I mean, I live in the South in the Bible Belt, so I think a lot of people think of legacy in terms of wealth. They think of it in terms of I'm gonna start a foundation, or I'm gonna leave my kids an inheritance or something. But as you mentioned, from a faith perspective, legacy is really about multiplying yourself. It's about investing into somebody who can do something greater than you can do it. And I think often, at least I'll speak for myself, when I thought of legacy, up until recently, I thought of it as, how can I leave my mark? I mean, it was kind of an ego-driven thing. I mean, I was thinking about how will people remember me? But, I think a great example is Jesus, and, there are lots of great leaders who exemplify this, but certainly I think he did it, the best, he invested in people and they multiplied the work that he set out to do. Yeah. They didn't do almost as good a job as he did. I mean, in many ways they did greater things, and he says this, you're going to do greater things than I will. And that's a mark of humility, and it's also a really intelligent way to take an idea, take a belief, take a mission, and multiply it. And that's very different from the way a lot of us live our lives, the way we parent our children, the way we, as leaders, and invest in people, and as disciples and teachers and friends, kind of share our lives with other people. I think what will happen at the end of your life is you'll realize that the calling, if you truly were called and you stepped into that work, is too big for one person to fulfill. Biblically, you look at this and you see this again and again and again. Abraham was called to a task that he never completed, right? Same thing with Moses. He never got to see the promised land. Even Jesus was this way. They were called to something that was bigger than them, that required a community of people, and they got to lead those people for a time, and then they invested in others, and then passed that work on to the next generation, and they did something greater. I think that it's really important that when you embrace your calling, you realize that the work is never going to be completely finished. Otherwise, you will drive yourself crazy, and you'll make lots of unhealthy trades in your life, where you'll trade your health or your time with your family and get consumed with the calling to the point that you're kind of missing the point, which is that if it's so big that it requires everything of you, then the point of that is to bring other people along for the journey. I think we shouldn't measure our calling or our legacy by what we do, but rather by what we leave behind. If I set out to do something big, obviously I want to accomplish as much of that as possible. But the work has a way of, multiplying itself in a business and a ministry, even as a writer. The more you do, the more work you kind of create for yourself. So right now, you need to be living a legacy by bringing people along with you on the journey to help you accomplish this task that should be bigger than you, so that you can hand it off to the next group, the next generation. That could be a seasonal thing, a lifetime thing, whatever. And the only way to do that is to have people around you right now that you're investing in sharing the work with.
Yeah, that's good. Greater things are still to come. And that's what my website that this will be launched on, Reaching Beyond My Reach, is all about. So it goes
Cool.
beyond to the next person. But thank you so much for your time today, Jeff. And I can't wait for all of you to read his new book. I'm trying to get a good shot here, which has already hit the shelves. And I've actually included a link in the post if you'd like to go ahead and grab a copy. And you'll be so encouraged with the practical, God-given wisdom that Jeff Goins shares on how to recognize your calling and move forward with it. Living in obedience to your calling is what Reaching Beyond Your Reach is all about. Thanks so much again, Jeff.
Thank you, Emily. It's a pleasure.